Every experienced ranger in Yosemite knew of the unspoken rule. If you found the scattered stone charms near the remote lakes, you left them alone. No questions asked. On August 15th, 2005, Park Ranger Gary Keating, blinded by grief and fog, broke that rule at Grouse Lake. Within hours, he would discover exactly why those charms had been placed there, and what happens when ancient warnings are ignored. What follows is a series of dark events where, through his better judgments, Gary felt drawn to the lake and the secrets that he was certain lay within it. Only he soon found that curiosity came at a price. One that, unlike grief, didn't ease with time, but instead flourished. This is Gary's only account of what happened to him, which he told psychiatrist Sally Littlefield at the Mammoth Hospital in the days after it happened. In this world, it is so often the case that darkness is drawn to sorrowed souls, and sorrowed souls are drawn to darkness. I always found myself craving the outdoors. The smell of fresh air and pine trees, nothing beat that. Yosemite has always been a backdrop to my life. I couldn't imagine ever living somewhere not framed by mountains and tree lines. Even now, after everything that happened, I still wouldn't want to give up that view. The wilderness is as beautiful as it is deadly. I used to think it was beautiful, but boring. Oh, how wrong I was. Out there, secrets are rooted beneath the earth, coursing through the bark and leafy veins. The more secluded the place, the more secrets seem to thrive within its boundaries. As a park ranger, I should have known that better than most, but back then I found myself oblivious to the whispering secrets. My life changed at the beginning of the year when I lost my son, Liam. The grief of losing a child is unexplainable, and so I'm not even going to try. He was 28 years old and a troubled soul. He didn't always make the right choices despite my wife Helen's and I's countless attempts to try and sway this. When I was headstrong as a child, my grandfather used to say to me, "You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink." I suppose, as much as I still don't want to admit it, in this equation, Liam was the horse. I felt like a failure as a parent and as a man. I had to take time off work, but then being at home drove me mad. I replayed the past, questioning every little decision I made. I just couldn't take being inside with the voices and the nagging doubts anymore, so I went back to work. Helen thought it was too soon, but she knew there was no convincing me otherwise. The outside world reminded me of how vast the world is and how small I am. On this particular day, I parked at Bridal Veil Creek, checked into the ranger station, and began the trail there, embracing the contrast of feeling exposed in the open terrain to disappearing beneath the overgrowth of trees. A weight seemed to lift from me as I walked, as though some of the guilt was flaking from my skin. I don't know. Maybe there was something in it, something in stepping out of my own head and being free. Work helped me start to feel like me again. I walked in a daze, checking in on my radio as required and listening to the buzz of the cicadas. By the time I reached Grouse Lake, something had changed. I'm not sure what. I had been there many times before, yet now as I looked at the docile blue water and the long stretch of trees and mountains beyond it, I felt this unexplainable pull toward the water. I sat on the grassy bank and drank from my flask of iced tea that Helen had made me. I don't know why I started to cry. I wasn't an emotional man. Helen will vouch for that. 35 years of marriage, and she has never seen me cry, not once. I couldn't remember the last time I cried. I hadn't cried when I lost my father, or even when I lost Liam. Now the tears seemed to pour out of me, and sniffling them back just made them worse. I let them stream out in the end, and wiped my tears on my shirt and the grass. It was as my tears began to subside that I first heard it. A whimpering sound. An animal's. It was the wrong pitch to be a coyote, more like a young dog. Our pup Baxter used to whine like that when he was a puppy and didn't like being left alone downstairs at night. Liam used to sneak downstairs to be with him. I couldn't help but always chuckle when I caught them both curled up asleep in the dog bed. Yes, this pup sound was persistent and sounded like it was coming from the lake. It puzzled me and I rubbed my ears, thinking that I was hearing things, but as I walked around the lake, I continued to hear the whimpering cry. I checked behind the trees, rocks, and anything else I could think of, but it didn't make any difference. The sound was coming from out in the lake. It was an arduous 9-mile hike back to the ranger station, so I knew I better get going, else I'd be stuck on the trail at night. It may have been summer, but the sun still set, deceptively so, going from light to darkness without much grayness in between. I set off, the dog's whimper replaying in my head. Back at the ranger station, I didn't tell anybody about what I heard. When my colleague asked if I was okay with patrolling Grouse Lake tomorrow, I found myself agreeing. I tried to push what I'd heard from my head, and this turned out to be easy to do, as tiredness seemed to find me. I guess my emotional outbursts had drained me. The next day, I checked into work, and then drove to the Crabtree Trail parking lot, the closest trail to the lake, but still a trek, and began on the Crabtree Trail before veering off onto the Grouse Lake Trail. I arrived at the lake without any problems and sat on a rock and stared out at the lake as I ate my lunch. I didn't want to stay too long and risk another outburst of emotion. It wasn't that my sadness ashamed me, more that I didn't have the energy for round 2. It was a clear summer's day, not a cloud in the sky, and then, suddenly, I was surrounded by this thick fog. I could barely see my fingers through it, and it masked over the lake. I stepped backward, using my flashlight to try and guide me away from the strangeness. As I walked across the grassy bank, the whimpering began behind me. The same young dog sound I'd heard the previous day. It sounded distant at first, as though it was coming from far across the lake. I rushed forward as quickly as I could in that darn fog, wanting to put as much distance between me and the lake. The whimpering sound continued as I kept on walking, only I was disoriented. The fog saw to that. I tripped over my own feet and fell to the ground, grazing my hands on something, a rock, and causing a smaller pile of stones to fall over and scatter around me. I was in the trees surrounding the lake, but I don't know how I managed to get that far. The fog seemed to tighten in around me, and the whimpers came in bursts from out there, in the lake. A splash sounded in the water, and thinking it was a person, I shouted, "Hello, is someone there?" Silence followed, and the fog began to clear enough for me to see my fingers clearly without the flashlight. The large rock in front of me with symbols carved into it, and the stones scattered around me, almost diamond in shape, but with rounded, smooth-looking edges. They weren't stones at all, they were charms. Rangers saw them around from time to time, usually in spots like this, away from the main trail. We knew better than to interfere with them, but in my distress, I'd managed to walk straight into one. Silence surrounded me. The fog was clearing. I told myself it was okay. I even started to chuckle to myself as I placed my grazed hand over my thudding heart. I didn't know what was going on, but I thought it was over. I was a fool to think that. I thought about picking the stones up, but decided just to leave them there. I whispered a sorry as I pulled myself to my feet. And that's when I heard the whimper boom directly behind me, the haunting sound echoing in my ears with such force and surprise, I jerked backward and must have knocked my head on a tree. I don't know how long I was unconscious for. All I do know was that when I came round, it was dark out. My flashlight flickered on the ground just ahead of me, and I heard this constant static sound coming from my radio. I grabbed my radio and tried calling in, but it was as though the other buttons were jammed and only the static sound continued. I pulled my aging body over to the flashlight, knocking it to try and settle its flickering. This didn't work. I was in this flickering light, static sounding trance. It felt as though I wasn't at Grouse Lake at all, but in another world, one where silence tickled at my senses. I knew I couldn't hike in the dark, so this meant I was stuck here until first light. I fumbled around in the flickering light to try and get away from the rock I disturbed. The whimpering voice knew where I was, so in my scrambled mind, I thought if I moved, I might stand more of a chance. I found a yellow pine tree, the branches bent slightly and sheltered beneath it, feeling small against its wide, orangey brown trunk. I cleaned my hands and the back of my bloodied head with an antiseptic wipe, and then I wrapped a foil blanket around my shoulders. I had enough water to last me another day and a couple of protein bars, but I didn't dwell on this too much. The other rangers knew where I was. If the signal remained static, they would come and find me. I tried to get some sleep, as there seemed little else I could do. I closed my eyes, and I dreamed of Liam. He was pleading with me to save him, his eyes full of sorrow, as dream me shook my head. Liam started to whimper, this dog-like whimper, just like Baxter used to make, a sound that altered into something more human. I opened my eyes with a start. The sound echoed around me. The distinct cry of a young child was coming from the lake. I instantly thought of Liam and how I needed to save him. I grabbed the flickering flashlight and left my backpack there. As I hurried toward the lake, I called out, "Liam, it's okay. I'm coming. Dad's coming." I waded into the water, boots and all. The urgency to rescue my boy was overwhelming. I didn't even feel the water around me. I just felt emptiness. The cries continue, the desperate cries of a young boy. I waded in, the water reaching my calves. I stopped, and I stared down at the water. With each flicker of the flashlight, I saw only darkness. Dark waters with no promise of hope. I shook my head and started walking backward. The lake fell silent. All I could hear was the sound of the water rippling as I moved. As I was about to step on the bank, something came out of the water and grabbed my ankle. A hand, small, just a child's, and icy cold. I froze in horror as it pulled me back toward the water with an unexplainable strength. I must have tripped as I landed half on the bank and half in the lake. The crying sounded out as I felt his hand pull me into the water. I dug my fingernails into the bank and pleaded for it to stop. The child's cries turned into laughter, a child's playful laughter. I clung onto the bank for my wife's sake, more than for mine. I couldn't allow her to lose me too, but a part of me felt like by holding on, I was letting Liam down. I know the boy wasn't him, not really, but in my mind, it was someone like him. The remnants of a lonely, lost soul taken too soon and trapped in the abyss. My fingers squelched through the muddy ground, and then my head went underwater. The flashlight that I dropped was on the ground in front of me, flickering in time to what I thought would be my demise. I fought with the water. I tried to grab onto something, anything, but the force pulling me was just too strong. The child's laughter echoed beneath the water, and I accepted my fate. As I was pulled free of the water and felt the grip loosen on my ankle, I didn't dare believe it at first. A Native American man loomed over me in a tan jacket with tassels on it, and as he lay me on the bank, he carefully peered down at the water and, taking something from his pocket, whispered words I did not understand as he dropped what looked like some kind of dust into the lake. Through my flickering flashlight, I saw it beneath the still water. The ghostly face of a child, frozen in time. its face twisted in the horrors that it had been as it faded away, becoming one with the water. Silence returned. Maybe it had never left. The man helped me move further away from the lake. I'd long since lost my backpack, so he gave me water from a flask and wrapped his jacket around my shivering body. There were so many things that I wished to ask this man, but my mind was as frozen as my body. I don't know how much time passed before the first light seemed to streak through the trees. He seemed startled by something and rose to his feet, towering over me. In a placid voice, he said, "You must not come here again. The drowned child senses your grief. Next time he will take you. Help is on the way." He nodded at me, and in my mind, I nodded back, but I'm not sure if I actually did or not. I watched him disappear into the shadows just as flashlights emerged from them. He had been right. Help was on the way. My body seemed to thaw out, and I felt a gnawing, aching on my ankle, the spot where I'd been grabbed. I rolled up my pant leg enough to look and gasped in disbelief. Even in the bleak light, I could see it. The small, icy imprint where fingers had gripped onto me. I was staring at them as the search team voices came toward me, calling my name. I took one last look at the lake before they led me away. I didn't hear the whimper, not a dog's or a child's, and I didn't see that man again either. Not seeing something does not mean it isn't there. Grief and pain can't be seen, but they are real. What happened to me was real too. I'm not certain of much in this world, but that I am certain of. Gary Keating was taken to the hospital and given a physical and psychiatric examination. He had hypothermia, a concussion, and minor injuries, including the unexplainable mark on his ankle. Gary's account of what happened was recorded as being due to the recent loss of his son. As an experienced Yosemite Ranger, he knew the stories of Grouse Lake, including the most famous account journaled by Galen Clark, Yosemite's first guardian. In it, Galen recalled hearing a whimpering sound at the lake, and on mentioning it to Native Americans was told that these were the cries of a boy who had drowned there. They warned him never to go close to the lake, for fear the ghostly boy may try to pull them under the water. Authorities believe Gary fabricated his own versions of events to cope with his loss. However, this didn't explain the clear outline of a handprint on his ankle, far too small to be an adult's, but too indented to have come from a child. Nor did it explain how the tasseled tan jacket that did not belong to Gary came to be around his shoulders. Gary retired from being a ranger, but continued to live in his California home with his wife, Helen. It was only recently, on Helen's passing, that Gary disappeared. A note was left on his kitchen table, held in place with a stone, saying, "I am ready now." The same day the note was found, a hiker at Grouse Lake discovered a pair of boots, later confirmed to be Gary's, and a flickering flashlight on the grassy bank. The lake was searched with no results. Gary Keating has not been seen or heard from since. Gary's story ends here, but the questions it raises linger on. Sometimes the line between grief and the supernatural becomes impossible to see. If you've felt that pull toward the unknown, that mixture of dread and curiosity, there are more accounts waiting in our archives. Subscribe to ensure you're here when we uncover the next one, and please share, and we'll see you in the next video.